Professor Glenn Diesen, do you think the growing military pressure from the US and Israel is unintentionally pushing Iran closer toward pursuing nuclear weapons? And if Iran's leadership believes it can no longer be stopped through military force, could this eventually trigger a far more dangerous arms race across the Middle East?
No, well, I had a talk recently with Theodor Postol, and he was a similar opinion. Again, he's a professor of nuclear weapons and nuclear delivery systems, ballistic missiles, all of this at MIT, and he also advised the Pentagon for a while. And his argument was essentially the same, that initially the Iranians didn't want nuclear weapons for rational reasons. That is, if they acquire it, yes, it's a great deterrent, but at the same time, it would instigate proliferation in the region. Then the Saudis would want to get one. Turkey might want to get one. So it would not end up enhancing their security. Again, more weapon doesn't always equal more security. But as you said, it is required, it seems, if they're convinced that the US and Israel refuses to, live with the Iranians and are determined to destroy them. Again, with the JCPOA, again, this came after all of these years trying to weaken, sanction, and destroy Iran. They gave them the JCPOA. It was never genuine. They never implemented it on the American side. And indeed, the Americans walked away. You had the June attack. And then a few months later, you're in December, the US and Israel very openly supports these riots within Iran, which leads to lots of deaths. And then that doesn't work out. So they go again, attack yet again in February. It doesn't work. The US accepts a ceasefire on this 10-point plan of the Iranians. Yet again, they don't actually accept this. They walk it back immediately. So they don't want to discuss what they had agreed. So why would the US and Israel give up now? And there's such a horrible track record. So at some point, I think the Iranians will, if they won't develop a nuclear weapon, at least they will become a proper threshold state. So they will be, a week away if they want to put some together. Again, according to Postol, the enriched uranium they can put together 10 to 20 nuclear weapons already. So
I heard that before. That's crazy.
Again, I'm not, these estimates can be wrong, but I think they already have the know-how, they have the material, and if they want a nuclear weapon, they can get it. The main problem, there's pros and cons. And if you're in the United States, you want to manipulate those pros and cons, but they're doing it all in the wrong way. They're giving Iran all the incentives in the world now to develop a nuclear weapon. So it's very dangerous. And this is a good deal on its own, to strike a deal with Iran, make sure that that we respect their security, that they have a deterrent, conventional deterrent. And then common sense should dictate that perhaps a nuclear weapon is not a good idea, because that leads to very dangerous proliferation. But nobody wants to discuss the security concerns of others. I mean, I always make the point, this is a common theme after the Cold War. Our politicians, media, they never discuss security concerns of the Russians, the Chinese, Iranians. It's part of the hegemonic legacy. We're a force for good. No one has any legitimate security concerns. If they do something, it's always in a vacuum. It's never in response to their own concerns. The whole world is just good guys and bad guys, and we'll have peace when we defeat the bad guys, essentially. So it's not. I mean, if we want to avoid this, a deal has to be made, but then it has to be based on recognizing Iran's security. This nonsense about peace through strength. I mean, if we just dominate them, we can dictate the terms. No. If we try to dominate and dictate terms when our goal is to destroy Iran, they will acquire a nuclear weapon. That's, I think, guaranteed by now, unless someone changes course.
Yeah, if these reports are true, and let's say they don't reach a deal on the Strait of Hormuz and the enriched uranium, Trump bombs. Do you think, is there still a risk that this continues into a prolonged conflict? Because the US has run out of a lot of munitions, including air defense munitions. Yeah, it's not possible, is it? Like, just numerically speaking, I was just thinking how a war would look like, even if they start using missiles that they haven't used, dropping bombs from fighter jets that are not depleted. The air defenses are depleted and they need to protect the Gulf. It's like a scenario for the war to continue, unless there's like some crazy idea of using a tactical nuke. A scenario of the war continuing, just the US and Israel bombing Iran, cannot succeed unless Trump is like, you know what? The Gulf is going to be destroyed as well, but I don't care. I'm going to go all the way. That's like the only scenario that would, if that will, the only scenario if war continues, a prolonged war, not a final attack by Trump. That's how it would look like.
Yeah, no, it is possible, or at least if he's going to go home, he has to declare victory somehow. If he can't get the concessions from Iran, but if he just lay waste to the whole country, destroy all their energy fields, carpet bombs their capital, just kill as many people as possible, then this is usually how he defines his victory. Though, whenever people are saying, "Well, you failed in Iran," what does Trump say in every single press conference? He says the same thing. Oh, well, I killed their leaders. They have no more navy, no more air force. They're obliterated. This is essentially how he measures success on the battlefield. So, but I think, well, hopefully someone in his government is telling him that to go for one big bang, that it won't do anything. That is, the U.S. can't keep a high-intensity war, and it doesn't get to choose when the war is over. This time around, the Iranians might not accept this ceasefire. Also, he killed a lot of people in the Iranian government, but it showed that they have resilience. The institutions remain. People are able to take their place. The military, it sank a lot of warships, but that's not the weapons the Iranians need to close down the Strait of Hormuz. They're able to replenish. They have the industrial potential to rebuild the drone and missile capabilities quite fast. And if the US decides to go all in, as you suggest, and just burn down Iran, then Iran has no reason to constrain itself either. I mean, the reason why it doesn't go up the escalation ladder is because then the US would mirror it. If the US goes up, it will go up as well. It can shut down the Red Sea, it can cut off the internet cables to the Gulf states, it can destroy the desalination plants, energy fields, essentially canceling many of the Gulf states as countries. So Iran can punch back in a big way. So the question then remains, if they can't succeed, what's the point of going down this road to begin with?
Man, look, if Trump goes all out on Iran, he's literally sacrificed the Gulf. There's no other way of saying it. Iran would just bring down, the Gulf's economies are just struggling significantly right now. I just don't know how, that's not feasible whatsoever. Well, Rubio said the following. He said today, a bit more optimistic on Iran. By the way, you hear this different rhetoric from both sides, gives you an idea of who's desperate for a deal. When Iran's like, oh, no, I don't think we'll reach a deal. And the US is like, yes, we're about to reach a deal. That says a lot. Rubio said the following. There's been some slight progress. I don't want to exaggerate it, but there's been a little bit of movement. The core US demands remain unchanged. No nuclear weapons, address enrichment, address highly enriched uranium, and resolve the Strait. Rubio confirms that Iran is trying to create a permanent tolling system for the Strait and is actively lobbying Oman to join. Quote, there is not a country in the world that should accept that. I don't know a country in the world that's in favor of it except Iran. The US is backing a UN Security Council resolution sponsored by Bahrain that Rubio says has the highest number of co-sponsors of any resolution ever before the Council. Now, if there is a UN resolution to open the Strait of Hormuz, and it's looking like it's possible, let's see where it is. The UAE President Advisor Gargash warns Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz will set a dangerous precedent. The UAE is welcoming an IMO Maritime Safety Committee decision aimed at promoting safe navigation in the Gulf in response to the Iranian threats. The IMO's UN's global maritime regulator. That's another way of saying the rest of the world won't accept the Strait of Hormuz that's controlled by Iran. That is a possibility as well, that Iran does bite off more than it could chew. And then you've got other countries, potentially even China, Russia, that turn on Iran. Because if Trump walks away, strategically that makes the most sense, because he makes Iran the world's problem rather than the US problem. So if he walks away, which is going to be difficult because that is admitting defeat, maybe the rest of the world starts to pressure Iran. I don't know. Look, we'll see. And then that goes into a bigger picture as well, into how that would influence what are China's intentions in all this, what are Russia's intentions in all this, because Russia's also pissed with the developments that are happening in Ukraine. So they might use Iran as a way to kind of get back at the US. So two questions there. Do you think the rest of the world could pressure Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz? And second, I'd love to also, if you could give us an overview of what's happening in Ukraine. I'm seeing the news, the drone strikes on Moscow. There's reports that there could be a massive drone strike in the next 24 to 48 hours, Ukrainian drone strike on Russia. I'm not sure if you saw those reports floating in various groups. Up to 3,000 drones to be launched on Russia within 24 hours. Not verified, but these rumors floating around after a pretty big attack a couple of days ago. What do you make of these developments as well? So kind of two questions in one.
Yeah. Well, first, I think on the Iranian issue, there's a plus and minus there in terms of how the rest of the world would look at Iran. I think the Russians and Chinese would mind to see Iran decouple or disentangle the United States from the region, reduce or weaken its presence. I think that they would see this as a positive development. Also, if they also agree with the Iranian assessment that the Americans will continue to come after Iran until Iran has been destroyed, then I think the Chinese would and the Russians would prefer if there is a toll. Of course, they would prefer if there was nothing there at all. But when, for example, in a meeting with Trump, the Chinese said that they want an open Strait of Hormuz, and I think they would trust it more under an Iranian toll than if the Iranians had been defeated, for example, because the Chinese and the Russians, they look at Venezuela, Cuba. The Russians are having their own ships hijacked. I don't think they trust the United States as being somehow the guardian of the freedom of navigation. But otherwise, no, I agree. I think they're probably concerned that this will set a precedent, and especially for a big economy like China, they wouldn't want to see international transportation corridors shut down in this way. But again, they have to find a deal then that also accommodates the interest of Iran and China for that sake. And regarding, when Marco Rubio speaks about nuclear weapons, I'm a bit filled with optimism, because if the US is able to reduce their objective down to preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons, it's a bit like the big achievement they had in their talks with the Chinese. China doesn't want them to have a nuclear weapon either. Yeah, that's a great thing. And nobody wants Iran to have nuclear weapons. Iran says they won't develop nuclear weapons. If that's the objective, then we can reach a peace, a goal.
No, don't get too excited. He mentioned enriched uranium. No.
Yeah. But regarding Ukraine, I'm not sure if they have 3,000 drones. They're definitely not producing 3,000 drones. But again, this is coming from Europe. The Europeans are supplying the drones. They are very openly expressing the goal that this should be used to strike deep inside Russia. The Europeans are also well aware that a large amount of Russian oil exports go through the Baltic Sea, which is why they would like to see the Ukrainians attack more in that part as well, which means that the Ukrainian drones have to fly through the Baltic states to attack Russia as well. So this is the dangerous escalation we're seeing now. That is, NATO is now already deeply involved in attacking Russia. I asked Colonel McGregor about this yesterday, and he was making the point that when the drones from Ukraine are flying through the Baltic states to attack Russia, that it's the Americans who are helping or directing this. So this is not just the Europeans. This is a NATO attack now on Russia, and the Russians know this. So if you ask me, I don't think they're going to sit back anymore and accept this. You will see, I think, more attacks on the Baltic states, especially Latvia, probably Estonia as well, but especially Latvia. And this can be Ukrainian drones. Maybe the Russians have downed and they send them back in, something that would give them, if not plausible deniability, at least the opportunity on the NATO side not to be compelled to go up the escalation ladder.
You mean what? So what would Russia do? You would hijack the drones and turn them on against NATO?
Well, many drones aren't shut down; they're just brought down. And then if some of them can be repaired and sent back, or I'm not sure.
So you mean repair the Ukrainian drone that they bring down and then fire it back at NATO?
Yeah, well, or just use their own drones. But I think they will do what NATO did, because NATO over the past 4 years they went with this gradual incrementalism, where they first said, oh, we can't send F-16s. This is World War III, and then just slowly, step by step, they did. By the way, this incrementalism, that's what they did with missile defense, NATO expansion. They've done it in the Ukraine war, and now they also do it with the drone attacks. They initially began by saying, oh no, there's no drones flying through the Baltic states, that's just Russian propaganda. And then they said, oh yes, because of some drones went down in Latvia and caused some damage. Okay, yes, there are Ukrainian drones flying here, but we didn't give them permission, and we blame Russia for it because it's their war of aggression, so it's their fault that the Ukrainian drones are there. And then, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, you had the Swedish Prime Minister making the point that, maybe we should help the Ukrainians direct the drones in the right way. So no, the Russians, I think, have had enough, and I think you're going to see a much bolder Russia now. They have new weapon systems out now. If NATO countries want to fight the Russians, I think they're feeling more confident now.
Great.
It's a very dangerous situation. No, it's not great in any way. This is quite horrific. I mean, all of this would be unthinkable during the Cold War. Imagine during the Cold War, someone will have got an idea, oh, let's attack, strike Russia through our proxy. And, everyone knows that it's our weapons. Everyone knows that we provide the targeting, we provide intelligence, we're doing the war planning. We're helping direct them, we help them evade the Russian air defenses. Let's strike Moscow. It's, we wouldn't be sitting here today if they did this nonsense during the Cold War, but this is where we are.
A new update from Tasnim News that there is proposals are going back and forth. There's no progress there. Just came in now. The source noted that some progress has been made, on certain issues, but stressed that no agreement will be reached until all outstanding disputes are concluded. The source also dismissed Western media reports on the details of any potential understanding as inaccurate. They keep shutting down the excitement on the American side. I think they just don't want that same strategy of trying to calm the markets or manipulate the markets. They don't want to give any breathing room to the US, to the Trump administration. Because every time Trump shares some good news, the markets relax. And what Iran has been doing the last few weeks, they kind of share bad news. So I don't know whether the Iranis are just sharing the truth, or they're trying to they're playing the opposite game, or the same game as the Americans, but just on the opposing sides to kind of calm down the markets. I have a question for you on the Ukrainian side, and a comparison to Iran. And I asked the same question to Alexander from the Duran earlier today. I'm like, what NATO's doing right now in terms of helping, what the Swedish Prime Minister said they want to do, helping with coordination and targeting, helping the Ukrainians. Isn't that the same as what China did in the Iran war, and Russia to an extent as well? China literally gave one of their satellites to Iran, and according to multiple reports, Iran would not have been able to target all these bases with such precision if it wasn't for the data that the Chinese have shared. So isn't China playing the same game as the US is playing in Ukraine? And a lot of the weapons that Iran is using is Chinese made or Russian made, or at least with components from these countries. And we know there's a lot of shipments, according to reports from China, of manpans and air defense systems. These will be used to shoot down American weapons and kill American soldiers.
Yeah, to an extent, and this is why it's very dangerous with these proxy wars, because in the proxy war, you always, there's some informal rules, and what exactly are those? And you see this being changed almost on a daily basis. That being said, no, I do think that if they supply the intelligence, they supply the weapons, they're getting deeper and deeper involved in this. But again, what NATO has done, they took it to a whole new level. That is, if they would have provided intelligence and weapons and then told the Ukrainians, you can only hit the Russians within Ukraine, that would have been one thing. But they said, why should we do this? Indeed, the Europeans set the goal. We have to bring the war to Russia. So they're encouraging the Russians to take the weapons. They're giving the intelligence within. This would be as if the Russians were handing out over ballistic missiles and drones and beginning to bomb Washington, D.C., from Iran. Again, the geography wouldn't permit this, but or London, or something else. This is striking their home territory, so not just on the battlefield. So I think it's still begins to go into direct participation, what the Russians and Chinese have done, but it's not even the same ballpark as what NATO has been doing towards Russia.
But it's a similar path, and that's worrying, as you said.
Yeah, it's very worrying, because this is not the end station. If this is what they do now, why not in 6 months take it a step further? And that's essentially, that's why it's so dangerous to have these long wars, because it permits the rules of a proxy war to be changed too much. And at this point, I mean, it's not even a proxy war anymore, and that is between NATO and Russia. This is, the weapons fighting the Russians, attacking Russia, many of them require contractors from NATO states. So there's no more Ukrainian involvement. It's West supplying weapons, West picking the targets after the Western war planning, and there's Western pulling the trigger. So this has already gone way beyond the proxy war, which is why it needs to be put to an end now, before we all burn, essentially.
After watching Glenn Diesen's recent interview, I think he raised a very important and thought-provoking perspective on Iran and the growing risk of escalation in the Middle East. One of the key points that stood out to me was the idea that increasing military pressure on Iran could unintentionally push Tehran closer toward pursuing nuclear weapons rather than preventing it. What makes the situation even more dangerous is how unpredictable Iran's internal power structure appears to be. This is not a simple system that outside powers can easily calculate or control. If the major powers continue relying more on pressure and confrontation instead of diplomacy, the risk of a new arms race in the Middle East could become much more serious. This discussion really highlights how fragile and dangerous the current geopolitical situation has become. Thank you very much.